Hello there everyone and welcome back to Corey's Datapad for another Mandalorian episode breakdown. Today we are talking about the Season 2 finale of The Mandalorian. This is obviously going to have a lot of spoilers, so you might want to close the video now if that's something you're trying to avoid. Later tonight we should also be having a full podcast discussion with myself and Eckhart's Ladder about this season finale and answering some questions. But yeah, so we have, it seems, wrapped up the Grogu plot of The Mandalorian and maybe even the Din plot, so we'll talk about that in a bit. But the episode opens with an assault by Din and everyone in the Slave One on the shuttle that Pershing is traveling in as a way to gain access to Moff Gideon's Arquitens. So they all board the ship, and before the pilot is killed, there's a discussion primarily between him and Cara about how the destruction of Alderaan was justified, and he's kind of using this to bait Cara. But we kind of get a bit of what we saw last week, where we're kind of seeing how the people who remain with the Empire at this point are the most fanatical, and we see another side effect of Operation Cinder is that only the truly loyal have stayed with the Empire this far, and you can kind of see how this will turn into something that is as dedicated to Palpatine as the Final Order is, or the general fanaticism that exists in the First Order the entire time. But we do get confirmation that Pershing is a cloner from Kamino, so there's some connection there, and we get another discussion later between Bo-Katan and Boba about how Boba is just a clone, he's not a Mandalorian, and Boba does acknowledge that he never claimed to be a Mandalorian, and that Jango was just his donor. So there is some part that cloning is going to play, possibly in Season 3. Like, the specific use that Gideon had for cloning technology is unclear, unless he was just like cloning the blood in some way. But then they would have had a bigger blood supply. So I'm really not sure where that's going, but it does seem to factor in quite a bit, and Pershing as the prime scientist on it. Unless it's just because he was involved in cloning and therefore in biological sciences would understand more of that. And that's why he was working with Gideon. But I don't know, that's still one of the bigger unanswered questions. And the other unanswered question is, what is going to be the resolution between Din and Bo-Katan? Because Din and Boba go to find where Bo-Katan and the Night Owls were. I don't think we've had any confirmation that they're actually still calling themselves the Night Owls, but that's always just been Bo-Katan's group, so I'm going to keep doing that. But they enlist the help of Bo-Katan and the Night Owl. Well, just the one Night Owl. The other one is out for lunch. He's on lunch break or something. I don't know. But after initially saying that she wouldn't help them and that Grogu's just gone, Din tells her that no, he can actually get to Moff Gideon, and this really perks Bo-Katan up. The deal that they basically make is that Din will make sure that Gideon surrenders to them. She doesn't clarify the reasons that Gideon needs to surrender to her, so it kind of, I feel like that would have been a more important thing to lay out to everyone, because this is why later on we get some conflict between Din and Bo-Katan, which we'll get to in a second. But she also says that Din would then, or she'd hope that Din would reconsider his position on coming to help restore Mandalore with her. And Din agrees to the first term and agrees to think about the decision. It's not really a direct demand in return for her coming, just that he think about it. So, but again, this is something that's come up a lot in the season and that I've talked about a lot in these reviews, is like, what does it mean to be a Mandalorian? That's something that Din has been thinking a lot about, and how he prioritizes being a Mandalorian in respect to what he's willing to do with and for Grogu. At the end of the episode, we see him taking off his mask as they're saying goodbye, or his helmet as they're saying goodbye. But first we have the assault on the Arquitens. I thought there was a lot of cool moments here. There's not a lot to break down plot-wise. There was, the key moment I think is the fight between Din and one of the Dark Troopers. The idea being that the Dark Troopers take a while to charge up. So a lot of the action sequences in this episode almost feel like the scenes on Tython, but in my opinion, a little bit higher impact and better done. So that episode now seems a little bit redundant to me almost, because that was just the combat. And I guess you do get to see Boba in action in a way that you don't in this episode. He does destroy the two TIE fighters, but other than that, it's like fighting stormtroopers until dark troopers activate. And I was thinking maybe this addresses one of my complaints with that fight, that it seems like we'll just send the dark troopers in first, whereas now they have to activate. But it seems like they could have just been activating the Dark Troopers earlier. So I don't know. I still do think that this episode was quite good, and that one is one of the ones in the season that I liked a bit less. Din was supposed to be going to get Grogu, and Bo-Katan and the rest of them were supposed to be going to the bridge to confront Gideon, then Gideon would be able to surrender to Bo-Katan. Unfortunately, Gideon kind of knows what they're up to, and goes and is with Grogu, which I think Gideon wasn't exactly unfamiliar with Cara, and I think even Fennec. No, probably less Fennec, but he would at least be aware that Cara was associated with Din, so while Din is trying to keep hidden, the fact that Cara is with Bo-Katan should have probably been a clue to them that Gideon would probably end up being aware that Din is there, so Gideon does what probably makes the most sense and goes to Grogu. He makes a deal with Din and basically says, well, I've gotten what I needed from him, the blood, and I'm going to let you take him if I get to keep the Darksaber. And I was kind of wondering where this could go between Din and Bo-Katan, but unfortunately, Gideon makes the, in my opinion, very stupid move to attack Din while Din is picking up Grogu. And later on, he does kind of the same thing to Bo-Katan, where he's hiding, when he's in custody, he's hiding the blaster, and then the person he goes to shoot was Bo-Katan, and then he goes for Din. He does take Bo-Katan out of commission for a second, but because of the armor, it doesn't really do that much, and it seems like the Mandalorians are quite safe in this. And people tend to just go for the protected parts. We do get that cool scene that's the fight between Din and Gideon. And well, I was thinking maybe the fact that Gideon attacked Din would remove any of those points of conflict between Din as far as the priorities of their missions being to recover the Darksaber and recover Grogu. We still get, as a result of this, because Din is the one that beats Gideon surrenders the Darksaber to Din, and now Bo-Katan is unable to actually acquire the Darksaber because it has to be won in combat. But the Dark Troopers, who I thought were beaten way too easily blowing out the back door, are starting to come back, and as they're breaking into the bridge, a lone X-Wing shows up. Eck was right. I think it was Eck that said Luke. When we did TapCaf, my bet was for it to be Ezra. I think Charlie picked Cal. Eck picked Luke. And as soon as the X-Wing shows up, it's like, damn, Eck was right. And Luke starts cutting down all the Dark Troopers, not the Darksabers. I've seen a few comments about the relation between this and the sequel trilogy, but right now we're seeing Luke in his prime, and before the life-shattering event of what Ben does at the Jedi Temple or the Jedi Academy that he's establishing. So I think it was really cool to have a scene where we do see kind of the warrior Luke a few years after Endor, fully trained Jedi, and he's the one who answers Grogu's call. So Din relinquishes custody of Grogu to Luke. At first, Din is like, no, he doesn't want to go with you. And then Luke says, no, he's asking for your permission. So we get a really nice goodbye between the two. And I was someone who was very afraid coming into the season how the cameos would kind of play out. And I think, for the most part, they were handled really well. There were a few episodes where I feel like it became less about Din. But even with Luke here, it doesn't become the Luke Skywalker show. Luke becomes a person who is tangentially related to part of what's going on. He helps resolve the thread with Grogu, but the primary focus is still on Grogu and Din. So while we do end what seems to be Grogu's role in The Mandalorian, for now at least, we got a good culmination in where their arcs were going and where their relationship was going, where Din takes off his helmet to say goodbye. We get a nice scene between R2 and Grogu. So now we just have to see what happens with Grogu in the Jedi Academy, because we know what happens to the Academy with Ben in a few years. And is Grogu going to be there? Is Grogu off doing something else? You have to assume that he would have been away from the temple when that happened, or else he's probably just dead. So I'm assuming Grogu won't have just been killed in that situation. So with Grogu resolved, that gets us to the other conflict that exists, which is now between Bo-Katan and Din, where Din is seemingly an unwilling Mandalorian, or an unwilling Mandalore now. He has the right to lay claim to the Mandalorian throne. Bo-Katan can't really take the Darksaber from him without actually taking it from him, though he doesn't want it. And he tries to give it to Bo-Katan, but she can't accept it because then it would be kind of a hollow gesture and it wouldn't mean as much. She obviously has no desire to fight him, and it's unclear who would necessarily win in a fight there, especially when Din doesn't really have any desire to fight her or fight for it. So we have someone who has been working essentially her whole life for the Darksaber and for restoring Mandalore, but it seems like what we could be building to with Din's arc is Din as not just the Mandalorian, but the Mandalore. Din in his time with Grogu has been somewhat more humanized than the more strictly military-minded Mandalorians, or the more tradition-minded Mandalorians, as someone who has originally come from the Watch side and is now probably a little bit more aligned with how Bo-Katan sees things. He could be a good bridge between those groups and someone who's in actually a good position to reunite the Mandalorians. However, we get a scene after the credits which is announcing the Book of Boba Fett. Now, I've seen a few people talk about this as a separate entity from The Mandalorian, and it seems to me that this is actually going to be The Mandalorian Season 3, rather than the Book of Boba Fett being its own standalone entity. It's unclear right now whether that is going to be the case. Maybe they'll be splitting time between Din and Boba in the next season. But we do have the primary plot resolve that Din was doing, where he was quested to to bring Grogu to his kind, and now he's done that. So we still have this unresolved element of the overall Mandalorian plot. This could be played out through other characters as well, though it seems Din still has a part to play. So we'll see how this ends up developing, whether the Book of Boba Fett is just the next set of chapters in The Mandalorian, and whether this plot between Bo-Katan and Din gets resolved in the future, because it feels like there's a lot to explore there. Either way, we're going to have a deeper dive into this as we go into TapCaf transmissions tonight, as long as X available. Hope you guys have enjoyed these recaps as well as the season as a whole. I really enjoyed it. This is probably one of my favorite episodes this season. I'd have to sit down and really think about all of them again. Maybe we'll do that tonight on the podcast. But it's definitely a top half episode for me, maybe even a top 1 or 2 episode. I think the first Bo-Katan episode might still be my favorite because of just the personal reasons relating to like redoing stuff from the tabletop RPG we were doing. I guess one other thing I should talk about is that Luke was done in CGI with Mark Hamill. And I wasn't bothered by this. I was watching it on a 4K TV, and even at that resolution, like I thought it was pretty well done. It wasn't enough to like bring me out of the moment, and I understand that this bothers some people. Like for some people, it's just too much. But for me, it didn't detract from anything. I would have been just as happy to have a new actor come in and play young Luke. And I think for a relatively minor part, this could have been a good place to introduce that. But I would have been happy either way, as far as having Luke as a new actor or having Luke as kind of the younger CGI'd version. One of the scenes that I actually really liked in Rise of Skywalker was the scene of Luke and Leia training as younger people. So this is kind of just that same idea, and I didn't have a problem with Leia in Rogue One. I understand that my opinion is not probably the majority opinion on this, but that's just my thoughts. But yeah, so hope you guys have enjoyed. Thank you for watching, and hope to see you next time. Bye, everyone.